Alluvium Risk to Earn, the Alluvium Deathmatch. We're going to make a way too early tier list as to what I think the best Alluvials are going to be. With this being no longer a team game, every Alluvial has to fight for themselves. So there's going to be a bunch of factors that I'm going to be considering based off of what we know of how they behave and how they fight in the Alluvium arena. Of course, being around Alluvium Arena for quite a long time now, and I can even brag a little bit, top 10 player right here for the time being until everybody who actually has a collection steps up. With how they behave, again, I'm thinking about a couple things. First off is going to be like their tankiness. Can they actually survive in a endurance style fight? Like, can they actually take a hit? Because there are going to be a bunch of Alluvials here that are ranged, that are naturally, at least in the arena, going to be protected by teammates. They don't have that luxury anymore. How does their Omega affect their ability to fight? Do they have a good Omega that can keep them in the fight, or is it more team-oriented and doesn't really do anything in a Battle Royale kind of style? Third, sustain. Can they actually, like, heal? Because from the document that we saw, you do heal basically 10% on every elimination, but for a lot of Alluvials, I feel like that's not going to be enough. And then lastly, yeah, what happens when they get swarmed? Because any Alluvial can do the one-on-one and maybe pick up a kill, but do they have the opportunity to still do well if they get swarmed or in a group fight scenario? Those are a bunch of things I'm going to be keeping in mind. So number one, we do have Titanor. Of course, it is the granddaddy of tanks here in the arena. Basically, you get this thing to, of course, protect the rest of your team. You have that stun with your Omega, of course, and it is a fantastic tank for the arena. However, we do have to take into consideration that in order to stay alive in the Risk to Earn game, you need to either be top 3 in kills or survive to the end. And I do not see a world where Titanor is ever going to get into the top 3 on kills, which means it always has to focus on surviving. So its chance at actually making it out of the game alive can be very, very scary because it always relies on it being the last Alluvial standing. So with that, I will throw it into C tier, where there is scenarios where if things go its way, like it gets down to the very, very end, to the eye of the storm, so to speak, in that final little Battle Royale zone. And all of the other damage dealers are so hurt from battling it out in the earlier stages of the game that maybe a Titanor, Goliath, or Scarabok, maybe one of those can actually find their way through with just auto attacks. I can see worlds where it could win based off of survival. However, a lot of things still have to kind of go its way. So B tier here for the Titanor. Next up on the list here is going to be the Fliish. I have the Exalted Fliish here, and I'm going to put this one into the C tier, because the big problem, of course, with the Fliish is that as a spellcaster and a ranged DPS unit, it might be able to pick up a couple of stray eliminations off of its auto attacks and its Omega, the little beam that it fires out. However, this thing is super squishy. So if it even gets focused at all, it is going to end up going down. So I can see it's not impossible for the Fliish to make it happen, but the likelihood is very, very slim. Next up on our list here, I do have the Axodon. I don't want to call it busted. So actually, Axodon, you might be the first pick here to go into the A tier as a great pick. And my choice here for that is, of course, Axodon is on the squishier side of the tanks, but of course its Omega always gives a shield. Its actual effective HP, or its EHP, as we would say in other games, is actually pretty significant. And with that shield, of course, as well, when the shield does go away, the Axodon explodes it, and it does damage to everything around it. So I can honestly see a world where not even just in 1v1s. In fact, the shields might be able to carry a 1v1 by itself, but even if Axodon does get swarmed on, it does have a way to kind of fight against everybody and hold its own a little bit. It might not come out completely unscathed, but constantly having that shield popping over and over and over again is going to keep it around. And if it, in an instance where maybe it is getting swarmed, if it manages to take out a weakling and then heal up by like 10%, okay, it's right back into the fight, pop another shield and keep going. I think the sustain of the Axodon lets it be a great survivor, but it's also in a decent enough spot where it might pick up stray eliminations. So honestly, Axodon, I'm going to put you up into A, and especially, another thing as well, I don't know how the extra affinities are going to work in this game, of course, but if Axodon actually gets access to Tsunami, and it gets even more AoE damage, that could potentially keep it at the very, very tip-top of A, if not bleed it into S. So it's something I'm going to definitely keep an eye on, but for now, we will have it as an A-tier alluvial for the Risk to Earn game. And we're looking at our poor dear Attipo. This is going to be the first one that I put into D for absolutely no chance of ever winning a game here. Because, yes, the Attipo has a ranged auto attack, but it is extremely weak. I do not see it being the favorite to capitalize on some of these last hit scenarios, being able to secure eliminations to keep healing itself. And then its Omega is basically completely defensive orientated. It might have a little bit of damage attached to it, but for the most part, it's just an AoE shield that's supposed to assist with like a corner composition sorta, or with your front line in the arena. And that is not very offensively orientated at all. The Attipo is absolutely going to get run over in a one-on-one. It's going to get run over in a group setting. It is highly unlikely that it's ever going to survive past the first couple minutes, in my opinion. Regardless of which Attipo you have, I do not see a world where the Attipo ends up being a good alluvial in the Risk to Earn game. And the Adorius is one of the best, if not the best, support alluvial in the game. I do see a world where Adorius could actually make it very, very well. Obviously, it's not as tanky as well a tank, but it's not super squishy either. But what I keep forgetting about Adorius is that it does actually have a damaging aspect to its spellcast, where it does go after, I believe it's 2 of the lowest health alluvials, and deals damage based off of missing health. I do see a world where Adorius, even though this thing is a healer, it could pick up eliminations based off the execution on its spellcasts. And of course, it's a healer, it's healing itself, which in a survival game like this Battle Royale here, I think is absolutely huge, to the point where I think I might even actually call this my first S tier. I think that Adorius, or the entire Ador line, could be a fantastic pick for this Risk to Earn game style. Now the Squiz line here with the Ophisto. Because Ophisto has easily some of the highest burst damage, if not the highest burst damage in the game. So in terms of eliminations, it is absolutely fantastic. But it's super, super squishy. I do really worry about its ability to be able to actually keep fighting even if it gets targeted. And that's going to prevent me from putting it into S. However, it will still go into A. I'm going to put it behind the Axodon though, because I can see a world where you drop an Ophisto in an area that you know is going to be busy, and the Ophisto gets to kind of sit back for a while and let it rain down lightning, and you might be able to kill off a couple of alluvials before they even really get a chance to get anywhere near you. But when it comes down to the late game scenarios, I do worry about it. Or God forbid some of those early games scenarios don't go in your way. Maybe there's another ranged alluvial shooting you down, or just based off of your spawn position, you end up kind of in the center of 5 other melee alluvials that are going to come charge you. You're not going to be able to get out of that because you don't have the sustain. You're strictly relying on that 10% heal on elimination, but depending on what's coming after you, that's not guaranteed. So Ophisto's going to be good, but I don't see it very often making it to the very end, but I could see it doing very well in terms of the Executioner's top 3, where maybe it can avoid being burnt just by getting on the top of the kill board. Next up, let's drop down to a tier 0 where I have the Grokko. Of course, in the Grokko, probably the best tier 0 alluvial out there for being tanky and having an AoE stun effect on its Omega. So how does that translate into the deathmatch? could be a nice way to maybe sneak in a couple of wins based off of survival, and maybe snagging an elimination or two because your Omega gets a stray hit on a very, very low health alluvial. So honestly, Grokko, I'm going to put you right next to the Titanor because you fill pretty much the same kind of role, but I love the self-defense that the Grokko has actually over the Titanor, but the Titanor has range on its Omega. So I'll keep it in this order here where Titanor is ahead of the Grokko, but in all honesty, for a tier 0, Grokko is still, just like in the arena, probably going to be your highest value tier 0, and it's probably going to be a fantastic way for newcomers to get into the game, not just the arena, but into the risk to earn side of things here as well. Dualeph. A Dualeph is going to have a very, very similar problem to Ophisto, where God forbid it gets swarmed, it could be problematic, but of course you are ranged. But the beautiful thing again about Dualeph though, is instead of Ophisto where the damage is just being heavy burst onto 2 alluvials, Dualeph is getting splash damage onto anything in front of it within range. And I think I value that more than Ophisto, because if I drop a Dualeph in to an area that I know is busy, and it gets to sit at the back, not necessarily uncontested, but if something is running at me, or if multiple alluvials are running at the Dualeph, can absolutely just blast it and everything in front of it, and not just trying to burst down 2, but potentially getting multiple. So I do see a world where Dualeph could, similarly to Ophisto, make it into the top of the elimination kill boards very early in a game. But at the same time, just being able to hit way more targets at once also lets you get that many more hits onto random alluvials. And if you happen to get the eliminations, you're going to heal. You have the potential to heal off of more. But in terms of survival, it's not the best still. So that's why I'm going to keep it from being S. The Anteater, of course, or the Vermilliare, the tankier of the rogues, alongside the Malura. And could it potentially have access to Spore? Because if Vermilliare does get access to Spore, that is another option for sustaining itself, which would make it a fantastic pick. Its Omega is a gigantic nuke all around it. So not only is it tanky, I mean, we've seen what's happened when people put Omega power augments onto a Vermilliare, throw it into a bunker composition, and watch one Omega chunk the entire bunker by like half. I mean, it's a fantastic little pick with it being a rogue. If it has access to crit similarly to what we see in the arena, I'll keep it an S for now. We might change it up later, but I do think if it has the Spore effect of being able to heal, that it's actually an S tier, 100%. Now, Seeforus is really, really interesting because as a spellcaster, normally you're pretty squishy. However, Seeforus is anything but. If it is able to keep the damage reduction it gets while it's winding up and taking its shot, it can probably pick up a surprising amount of eliminations, even if it's being swarmed. Because if I recall correctly, I believe Seeforus hits 3 of its closest targets, so it's doing big nuke damage to things that are close to it. But even better, if it's just a one-on-one, it still shoots out 3 missiles, but now all of those missiles are going to converge onto one target, just like it is in the arena. So the Seeforus could literally pop some units. However, I imagine this thing is going to be very, very slow. Is it going to be able to outpace the ring? And there is still worlds where it is going to get completely swarmed down and destroyed. It's tanky for a Scion, but I mean, Scions aren't very tanky. So it's not setting the bar very, very high. Maybe do decently in terms of getting on the elimination board. Like maybe this is your budget version of a Dualeph trying to camp out maybe a cornucopia of sorts where the boosts are, or getting to a busy spot and being able to pick up some eliminations. But I do worry about its move speed, and I still worry about it being able to actually sustain and make it through the bubble itself. So while the rest of these tier 5 alluvials are up into the A side or better, the tier 1, the budget option for Scion, I do think is going to be at least a B. Alright, how about the Queen? Monarch is up next, and this I like a lot personally. Monarch, of course, another Scion, but with it having the ranged attack, plus having the Omega that brings it up to the skies, does basically a carpet bomb, and most importantly, it breaks targeting or for units that can only attack ground. So in an instance where it is being swarmed on, it can pop up, leave the path of fire, probably doing damage to everything that was hitting it, then making all of those alluvials fight each other because it became untargetable by ground attacks, but they're fighting each other on top of the fire, while the Monarch gets to run away and then start shooting back at them later. This could honestly be a fantastic pickup, because the only exception to that rule in regards to the untargetable is if it's a ranged unit. Because a ranged unit can actually shoot up into the skies. But a majority of your rogues, and a majority of the cast, I'd argue, would not actually be able to keep targeting Monarch as it's doing its aerial flight. Monarch, I think, is going to be S tier. The only thing it doesn't necessarily have is sustain, but I believe that the carpet bomb or the fire on the ground could sneak in a handful of last hits and maybe get you that 10% health boost that you're looking for, while also staying relatively safe, which would kind of make up for it in my opinion. Either way, it's going to be S. I'm going to put the Adorius above it still because the Adorius can do a much more consistent job of healing itself, but Monarch is still absolutely fantastic. Of course, the tanky Komodo Dragon, its Omega, of course, being able to give that puff of smoke around it that does do a subtle little bit of burn damage, chips away at you while also blinding everything in sight. It doesn't make you go untargetable, but it does at least stop the auto attacks from hitting you ever so slightly. If Wildfire is in the game as well, Blotto has that ability to set an alluvial on fire for a couple of seconds while this is happening, and maybe helping assist in the war of attrition, because that wildfire damage would then also heal the Blotto as well ever so slightly with a little bit of Omnivamp. I think that this one is probably going to be an A pick. It lacks on elimination, but it is so safe in my opinion. Only really big burst damage and like major damage dealers are going to be able to sustain it. But again, if you're relying on auto attacks and then the wildfire ticks to get your eliminations, that could be troublesome. I feel like it has a very, very good chance of surviving and maybe picking up an elimination here and there. Even though the Arcane Lynx is a Scion, it is still probably way tankier than average. All of the Lynxes tend to be. Not to mention the fact that the Arcane Lynx has that big old AoE cone of sorts that can absolutely chunk very, very similarly, if not chunk harder than the Dualeph. This is a weird spot, because if I were to go just off of the same justifications as Dualeph, I imagine that the Lynx would then be an A pick here as well. Not to mention that I think the Arcane Lynx would have a little bit of a better time given its wider area of effect for picking up eliminations and being much tankier. Oddly enough, while we might hate on it a little bit in the Illuvium Arena for being kind of mediocre, it could very well, potentially, be a great pick. Mammoth is an interesting one because while it is super, super tanky, it does not necessarily have that most upfront damage. Its Omega can chunk. Having an AoE stun is definitely nice. It'd be throwing this thing over into a big old group of alluvials, and as a bit of a get-off-me option as well, and doing a big chunk of damage, but there's a long wind-up there. The Mammoth doesn't really get to spit that out very often. So it's just auto-attacking and being kind of tanky. So I do like Mammoth. I think it could very well find some strays, but I'm going to put it into B, and there very well could be instances where it does manage to make it to the end, but I hardly ever see this thing being a kill leader of sorts. Next up for the Virtuous Lynx. I have the Virtuous Flora Lynx here as the icon. This is for any of the Empath fully evolved Lynxes. This one I'm going to put into needing to get lucky, but a little better than the Fliish. Does have an okay auto attack. It is relatively tanky, and heck, it can even sustain itself, but a lot of its damage requires you to charge at it. And in a best case scenario, it's all just one-on-ones and whatnot. The Lynx can out-sustain the majority of one-on-ones, I imagine. However, if it turns into a ranged versus range battle, the Lynx only having its sustain and its auto attack, I feel like will underperform with majority of our other ranged combatants here. So if they're going up against a bunch of melee though, where the AoE on the floor could actually start doing some damage to things that are close to it, it might be okay in that regard. But in a ranged battle, it gets absolutely cooked. If I was generous, maybe bump it up to B, but I think the Virtuous Lynx will end up in C. In a very, very similar nature, we do have the Appon, where instead of it being AoE healing, it just does an AoE stun for a little bit of burst damage. I think that this one might very well go into no chance. Into D tier. I do not see a world where the Appon actually ends up being the last one standing, relying strictly on its auto attacks. And even if it does get the damage amplification from using its stun, its auto attacks don't hit that hard. And sure, it does have a little bit of a get off me option where any alluvials that are charging at it will get stunned. Heck, there is even the potential. There is the potential, of course, where if there is multiple alluvials charging at the Appon, it fires off its stun, and maybe the Appon gets lucky, and they actually start attacking each other instead of the Appon. But a lot of things have to go its way. I think I'm going to make a slight change. I'm not going to call it no chance, but holy smokes, do you need some things to go into your favor to actually perform. Does not have the damage, does not have the sustain, and I do not see it surviving often, but at least it can somewhat cause some confusion in the form of crowd control. So in a perfect case scenario where you get lucky, maybe you can find a victory with an Appon. That'd have to be few and far between. Phosphorus. Oh dear god, we got the big bird. Tier 5 fully evolved Phosphorus. It's an absolute legend in the arena, and it's not going to be any different here in Risk to Earn. What it does not have in sustain, it has with damage, especially its Omega, being able to shoot and pierce through multiple enemies, being able to pick up straight eliminations, getting that extra heal, being relatively tanky as well for a fighter, being stupid fast as well, easily the fastest alluvial in the game if I recall correctly. So it could find these positions, it's going to always be in combat, but it also is probably going to be an absolute menace in terms of, to use a Fortnite term, third-partying people. Being able to find two alluvials that are already in combat, just come up and clean them up and take your heal, take your boosts or whatever and call it a day. Phosphorus, you might actually be S tier. I think the Phosphorus might actually do better than Adorius. Of course, if anybody has any comments or wants to dispute anything, you're more than welcome also to let me know in the comment section later on. Now, the Gyysser line. If we think about the Gyysser in the arena, it does not move. It does not auto-attack. It's a beefy boy, but all it has for defense and offense is its Omega. I do not see a world where Gyysser can actually win in this game mode. Everybody gets to attack away at it. Yes, it'll fire out its healing rain and damage rain, but again, it's meant to be supportive. It's a small bit of damage and a small bit of healing that was meant, at least in the arena, to kind of keep everybody sustained as you kept on fighting. But as its own standalone alluvial, in a one-on-one versus an Attipo, I think that the Gyysser will lose. And in the instance where nobody attacks the Gyysser, if it does get the move, I can only imagine it's going to be so slow. So it's just going to die to the bubble. Next up, we do have the Caradulox, but it has a little bit of a problem. If we think of the arena, we think of its Omega. It doesn't have burst damage or anything along those lines. It gets a little bit of damage reduction, which is nice. It gets some thorns, which is nice, but it's a taunt. You get everything to attack you. If it currently stays that way, I think that Omega is writing its own death sentence. Because in an instance where, say, the Caradulox, it happens to be third-partying up onto a fight, it has to jump on them, but to find its value with its Omega, it requires it to all being attacking you. You walk up and you accidentally taunt a group of 5 or 6 alluvials. So honestly, Caradulox in its current state, I don't see how this thing can win. It's going to end up just taking too much attention and not having the firepower to actually keep it going. So yeah, no chance in my opinion here for the Caradulox. Gyro. Now, if this was a race to the center, I'd have Gyro up there probably with Phosphorus for absolute S tier. But Gyro, of course, rather squishy, being a rogue, but at least it's a ranged rogue. So it could probably be an expert in the art of third-partying onto people here. Being able to just kind of show up, shoot from afar, let the other alluvials take it down. My only concern is when the Omega does come out and it starts to roll and go for that group of alluvials, the targeting doesn't change and the alluvials keep fighting each other, not realizing the Gyro's like even there. Gyro's kind of sick actually. But if all of a sudden Gyro rolls in and then they're like, okay, never mind, let's go get this thing instead, Gyro's screwed. I think I'm going to be putting it into B. Okay, not the top of B. We'll keep it at B, but we'll put it at the bottom of B. Jotun, the big old polar bear. It is super tanky. It has natural sustain in its Omega. It comes out quickly. Does a ton of damage. It's got basically everything you want. But if it does somehow have a way to proc Behemoth as well, where it gets a stun every couple of effects, this thing is going to be an absolute monstrosity. So I think this might be S. I think just being able to hit more things more consistently, more often, does put Phosphorus ahead. But if Jotun does get access to a stun, it is going to be a super clutch alluvial. Like in an instance where it's, say, a Phosphorus versus Jotun one-on-one, if Jotun has Behemoth, I think it wins that fight. Exalted Grilla. One of the squishier alluvials here in the game, but has plenty of damage. Its Omega is a nice single target nuke, and of course it gets to drop the clone of itself that causes retargeting basically. The Grilla can escape for a little bit, the other alluvials will attack the clone, and then optimally in a perfect world, let's say there's a world where the Exalted Grilla got swarmed on. It pops its Omega, it chunks one of them pretty decently. If there's 2 or 3 alluvials that were going after it, it starts to attack the clone. Then once it's done with the clone, either the other 3 start hitting each other, or maybe 2 of them start hitting each other and then the Grilla gets a one-on-one. It's basically bettering the odds that it's going to get itself a fairer one-on-one fight. And of course it can do that multiple times in a skirmish. It's not that squishy that it gets usually 1 chance. Usually it gets a chance at least 2. But it does not have any innate sustain, and it is still squishy compared to a lot of these alluvials, but I do value being able to drop aggro and give yourself a much better fight while also having decent damage. So I think the Exalted Grilla, I'm going to put right behind Axodon. Not the best, but for it being a tier 1 budget option alluvial, it's a great pick. Looking at the Kukkaraph as well, but another tier 1 option here, it being an empath, but a relatively tankier empath with a little bit more attack range than average. That little bit of range where it doesn't necessarily have to be point blank with something could very well be enough range, enough of a range difference to make it so that the Kukkaraph isn't the first thing targeted, but yet it's still going to be able to get into the fight. Not to mention as well, its Omega, how does focus work? Because in the arena, anything that's really close to Kukkaraph when it uses its Omega and stuns up the other alluvial, they kind of retarget, I believe, towards that alluvial that's being stunned, and it takes increased damage. Could Kukkaraph or Kukkaraph or whatever be the ultimate troll, hops into a third party, stuns and puts a massive damage taken debuff onto an alluvial and gets a nice quick elimination, then it can turn it onto the other one and keep going? Kukkaraph might actually be a hilarious troll, and I kind of love it, to be honest. And it's tanky enough, it has the shield built into its Omega as well, so it does have some pretty decent effective HP. Not necessarily a heal per se, unless it does have access to Enchanter. If it can somehow get access to Enchanter as well, I know it's not a huge heal, but it's something. That alongside being able to actually take a one-on-one fight and be a little bit safer off than compared to like a Grilla or even any of the tier 5 Scions. I think that Kukkaraph could actually be a great pick. From the Kukkaraph down to one of our tier 0s, let's take a look at the Doka. Pretty much its entire kit is focused around auto attacks. It's always going to be the thing point blank with the opponent. It doesn't have that much burst damage attached to its Omega either. Yes, you do get the bonus attack speeds. It's always going to essentially win the fights it's supposed to, but then lose everything else. It doesn't have that clutch factor, but I imagine Dokas will absolutely just be fodder for the majority of Alluvials. So for it to win, it'd have to get lucky. The Stoic Lynx. As if the Lynxes weren't tanky enough already, the actual Bulwark one is very, very good, and it has an effect very similar in nature to the Grokko, where it has the stun all around it, but it's way tankier and does a little bit more damage. So to keep it simple, because it's pretty much a little bit better version of Grokko, I'm just going to put it just a little bit better than Grokko. Just ahead of it, but not as good as Titanor. Again, I still think the ranged stun that the Titanor has and the higher resistances and health that the Titanor has is going to outvalue it compared to the Lynx or the Grokko. Rai-lee. Of course, you got to get up close and personal, and honestly, you are just basically a slightly better Doka, but even thinking about it, your Omega does very, very little. There is one world where I can see something really, really funny happening, though. For any of those people that do want to roll the wheel, and you get, I believe it's Bloodlust or something along those lines, where the lower HP you have, the faster and more attack damage you do. Rai-lee's Omega does have it so that if it's at a low enough HP, its Omega, I think, stops becoming attack speed based, but then becomes like a little bit of a heal. And if you have that onto Rai-lee, where it's getting the Bloodlust buff, where it's attacking super, super, super fast already, but it's sustaining, it might be one of those instances where it sits there at like a quarter HP forever, and just, while it's swinging, it does not die, but as soon as it's not hitting anything, that's when it's vulnerable, and that's where it kind of gets shot down by a ranged alluvial. So I'm going to put Rai-lee top of need to get lucky, because it's basically Doka, but it does have a little bit of extra cheese that you can apply, so to speak. Blazenite is going to be interesting. Firing off that tornado in front of you, it could hit multiple targets and be a fantastic way to secure some last hits. Your Wildfire as well, so you do get to proc, or potentially proc that, and start dealing a little bit of extra damage, a little bit of extra sustain. Being ranged, though, is quite nice. I think Blazenite could potentially be very, very good. Not sure if I necessarily want to call it S, though. We'll probably put this into the top of A, because it has the firepower that Blotto wish it had, but just a little bit less tanky. But even then, Blazenite's not that squishy. So yeah, I think I like that spot right at the top of A. The Exalted Monkier. So just straight up, as simple as it gets, just in-your-face brawler. Every 3 swings, or every 4 punches, it gets the AoE effect of everything that's behind it. It'd be really good if it's fighting something and other things are coming towards it, and maybe stopping third-partiers from getting the eliminations or final shots, final hits, without taking scratch. Like, the Monkier would be able to put some pressure onto them, and maybe punish those third-partiers. But just because it has AoE doesn't mean it necessarily has a good time up against swarms, because that AoE, it's not circular, it's strictly like a cone behind it, right? So I do worry that the Exalted Monkier would just end up getting swarmed down, and while it is a little bit tankier than, say, the Rai-lee, it's not by that much better, and it is not a very, very fast fella. So I think I'm going to actually put the Exalted Monkier into the spot where it needs to get lucky. It may have firepower, but I do worry about its sustain. Oh, but if it has Berserker, though, hang on. If it has access to Berserker, it does get sustain innately. Yeah, that would pop it up big time, actually. That would pop it up big time. Just having sustain in fighting You still get rocked if you're getting swarmed, but at least you're optimally swinging fast, getting your procs off with your Omega that does not require energy. It's just every couple of punches. As long as you don't get stunned up, you can, in theory, just keep going. Yeah, I think I like that a little bit better. Scoriox. Of course, the snake is meant to be a ranged damage dealer. While it does also have some AoE damage to whatever it is shooting, it is a pretty small radius, and at the same time, the Scoriox is rather squishy. I think it's probably a similar scenario to our other top tier scions. Like, I can see start of the game and whatnot, especially in a very, say, high contested area if there happens to be a boost somewhere or something along those lines, if that ends up being a thing. It can do a fantastic job of kind of whittling away these other alluvials AoE style. But at the same time, since it's not burst damage, it's kind of sustained damage, it still has a chance of having its last hits kind of taken away. Like, say, for the Dualeph and the Octius, I know if those two are going to swing out, or even the Lynx, if that shot's coming out, that is going to be a major chunk of damage that could clean up some last hits. I cannot say the same, actually, about Scoriox. I'm going to bump Scoriox, actually, down to B, where it very well could still perform well. Chakondi is going to be interesting. As fire, does have wildfire as well. Of course, definitely a fan of... But the beautiful thing about Chakondi is its Omega. Because every single time it fires off its Omega, it takes a little bit to charge. It's not the fastest thing in the world to charge. But if you're getting hits, especially, if it charges up quickly and it uses its Omega, to burst damage to one target, while also firing off the cloud of smoke to not only blind, but also make you untargetable. That's a couple of extra seconds that you're buying between the untargetable and the blind in a one-on-one scenario. If you're getting swarmed, that untargetability is going to allow you to get those other alluvials to start attacking each other, so then you come out of the untargetability in a little bit of an advantage state. You inevitably become the one third-partying what was originally your own fight. Granted, it's only the damage to one alluvial, but I think I value that untargetability very, very much. If I put the Grilla up into A, or what I would argue is a weaker version of what Chakondi has. I think Chakondi, I'm going to put it right behind Axodon, I think. Because being able to dip in and out of untargetability is going to make you an absolute menace on the battlefield. But you are not the tankiest. And being able to focus your Omega onto one alluvial compared to like an AoE effect is going to keep it into A. Oh, my dear Scorpion, your fellow toxic brethren of the Caradulox did not necessarily do very well, but how about this Berserker Scorpion? Has one of the fastest charging Omegas in the game as well, hits like a truck, has a little bit of innate sustain due to toxic, but it's not very much, but it's better than nothing. But if it has the sustain from Berserker as well, it could be very, very good, but it's a little too honest. But it is just a heads up fighter. It doesn't necessarily have the gimmicks or the extra strategies to keep itself alive. It's just a heads up fighter, but it's definitely better than the Exalted Monkier. I would argue that Riplance is a great pick, but it's all single target, just heads up fighting. If it gets swarmed, it's screwed. If it's just an honest one-on-one fight, it will absolutely clean house. Unless it happens to be one of these other tier, S-tier alluvials. Like, if you're going up against a Jotun, and it's stunning you constantly, and healing constantly, you're probably out of luck. If you have to deal with the Monarch flying around and being a nuisance to you, you're probably going to have a bad time. If you have to deal with Adorius constantly healing itself, I mean, this one might be arguable. We have the Exalted Valente up next here. And if there's one thing that a Valente could do, is get a nice, quick, cheap single kill. And if things line up in its way where it's never swarmed, and it hits those silences and hits those Omegas at just the right moment, it has that innate burst that might be able to help get it onto that top 3 kill board. but it is so squishy, I never see this thing surviving ever. I think I will put the Volente ahead of Fliish, but behind the Lynx. Because while the Lynx doesn't have the burst damage, it does make up for it with tankiness and sustain. Alright, Malura. How would you implement Bloom into this? I don't know why it's just coming to my mind now, because we talked about Phosphorus earlier. But if Bloom is somehow there to heal and... Oh god, Phosphorus with Bloom. Right. How could I have forgotten? If Wildfire is in the game, I'd expect Bloom to be in the game as well. Same thing with Toxic and all that, so oh god. I was worried about Phosphorus not having any sort of sustain, but I completely forgot about Bloom. Okay, it's definitely in the right spot then. But in regards to Malura, it's meant to be one of the tankier rogues of the squad. Its Omega ability is the Charming Blender, where basically it dives into the ground, goes untargetable, but anything around it gets charmed, and then the Blender comes on through and just crushes everything all around it. This is a noob killer, if I ever seen one. All those people that might be just picking up a tier 0 just to throw something into the fight, Malura is going to feast on their demise. It's going to get up and close to them, get the charm in there, and Blender, and let's be honest, it's tanky enough that it can easily do maybe 2-3 Omega casts if it was getting swarmed by 5 Alluvials, for example. The big issue with Malura is just going to be other crowd control, because that's when it starts to get hurt. If Bloom is in here where it's healing as well as gaining more Omega power as the fight goes on, again, we don't know exactly how the affinities are going to work in the game yet. It's still very, very early. But just thinking about it, Malura is going to be incredible in theory. The only thing that's a little bit awkward is the charm sometimes does make it where they force them to attack you. But if you have the sustain anyway, does it really matter? Malura, I think you've got it all. Right, the Nimble Lynx. It's a rogue, but yet it's tanky, and it also has burst damage. And of course, its Omega is a massive burst damage that could even, like, take a tank from half health. Lynx isn't too bad, but it is going to fall into the trap where if it gets swarmed, it's screwed. It has no sort of crowd control. It has no sort of invulnerabilities or untargetabilities. No get it out of jail free card. No get off me options. So it has to burst it down no matter what. But at least it actually has burst. I will take the Lynx, and I think I'll put it actually ahead of... Oh no, let's put it behind Mammoth. So we'll put the Lynx right there. It very well could survive. It's not a terrible pick. Cue in the slashing. Of course, Death Pangu, one of our absolute top tiers from the arena, but it is a top tier because of its safety normally. We would have augments that would keep it safer. We would have attack damage or attack speed augments. We would have the phase breaker to keep it safe if it gets targeted in this team settings. You have probably Malura there with it, keeping it safe, but that's not going to be the case here in Deathmatch, right? Penguin has to actually fight for itself, where it's squishier than Riplance. But it does maybe have a little bit of extra attack range, so maybe it can third party a little bit better compared to some of these other Alluvials, because it has that range. It'd be very, very similar in nature to what I would see, say, the Kukkaraph doing. Except Kukkaraph actually has a stun, but again, what Slashin doesn't have in terms of a stun, it has in terms of just incredible damage. So while Penguin would be S in terms of the arena, it's falling into the trap where I think it's probably a little bit too honest, which is painful for me to say, but in a Battle Royale scenario, you have single target damage. It's not necessarily burst damage either. It's a great pick, but it is not anywhere near the level of, say, Jotun. My beloved Archelion. In terms of Archelion, of course, it's meant to be an AoE healer into a corner composition. It can move. It's not like the Gyysser where it doesn't really move at all. The AoE for healing yourself and allies is nice, but of course we're not talking about allies. This is just a solo experience. I think I'm going to take Archelion, my beloved turtle, and put it behind the Doka, actually. Because yes, Archelion, it does have a ranged attack, which is quite nice. Sure, other alluvials coming towards it could get tied up by the heal as well, because it's not just the heal, it does a little bit of damage over time and rooting other alluvials. But it doesn't retarget. It stops Omegas from being cast, which is quite nice, actually. That'll be my bias pick for the day. I'm at least moving the Archelion above the Doka and above the other tier 0s. Let's put it right next to the Virtuous Lynx, actually, because they behave very, very similarly, actually. Gnarl, okay. Just like Archelion, it'll also have Verdant as well, but at least here for Gnarl, quite a bit tankier. Gnarl does have a little bit more health than the Archelion. If it has the ability to go get Colossus as well, it would have a lot more health than Archelion, while also having Verdant. So in terms of sustain, in terms of just surviving, it's already an absolute menace. Its Omega ability, being able to go ranged, is interesting, but how do you charge it from afar? You just have to get shot by ranged units, right? So, I mean, it's nice having a way to eventually combat the ranged units, similar to what I was kind of describing with the Titanor, except the sustain options here for Gnarl are better. So what I'm going to do is take Gnarl. It could absolutely survive. In a war of attrition, Gnarl is incredible, while also having a decent Omega as well. But I do not see this thing ever making it to a top of a kill board, and its slow movement speed could very well cause it problems when it comes to the bubble, in terms of the actual arena for the deathmatch itself. But it's not a terrible pick by any means. The T-Ru line, Tibi'Rukko, is showing up here, and this is one of those alluvials that I don't see a world where it ever wins. I know I've made the joke before that Tibi'Rukko is basically just a affinity filler for those people that are trying to get shock. If somehow Tibi'Rukko could have shock with it so it zaps nearby alluvials, then maybe I'd think about it, but even then, like, its Omega does basically nothing in a setting like this. But these are actually gameplay changes that I would need for Tibi'Rukko for it to actually be somewhat viable in its current state. Unfortunately, Tibi'Rukko is just kind of a meat shield. And a meat shield in a game with no team is just pointless. Next up, the Seer. Of course, another behemoth. So very, very similar in nature here to the Jotun. But of course, the Seer's Omega, the spin to win, being able to do damage to everything around it at a pretty decent rate, is actually pretty incredible. It doesn't sustain itself from its Omega, unlike the Jotun, but you do get damage reduction. The biggest thing that you'd have to worry about are random things like crowd control, where it actually stops your Seer from spinning. But in an upfront battle, the Seer is auto-attacking, it's stunning because it's Behemoth. It gets swarmed, oh god, does not matter, start spinning. Start spinning on everything that's around you, and if you happen to pick up a couple last hits, you're healing as well, while having damage reduction? I think that is pretty incredible, but you are lacking burst. I'm still going to put this into S, but the very bottom of S, because it does not have any sort of untargetability or innate sustain. But having a stun, having massive AoE, and consistent AoE is definitely very, very nice. But you don't have that burst, like the Malura, for example, to kind of secure those finishing blows. Rampfire, probably the most popular alluvial in the game currently, and understandably so. Jump to the skies and nuke everything around you. But you're somewhat frail because you are a rogue. If Malura is a noob killer, then Rampfire is absolutely a noob killer as well. That's the same like kind of perk as Monarch, actually, where it does temporarily go untargetable for alluvials that only attack ground units. It could still get shot out of the sky, but it has that burst damage that is just absolutely phenomenal. And if there's anything that could sustain off of getting kills alone, it would probably be Rampfire, but again, it relies on you getting kills. But your chances are probably the best. I think I'm going to keep it like that, yeah, because Rampfire could come down, and yes, it does a big chunk of damage, but if it is a swarm scenario, it is going to get turned on eventually and bursted down. Meanwhile, with the Monarch, yes, they have their AoE with the Carpet Bomb, but they're also flying away. And then being able to shoot from afar, nearly guaranteeing that unless it was a ranged alluvial going after it, that it does stay untargetable and it ends up getting the jump onto those in that fight. So yeah, I think I like this. The Fennec Fox line, so Gazetep being shown here. And of course, Gazetep is probably like the most support alluvial currently in the game, but yet it doesn't even necessarily heal. It has a shield every time it fires off its Omega. And with it being a Dust and Enchanter alluvial, in theory, it would heal itself a little bit every bit on cast, do a little bit of damage. And it does a little bit of damage with its Omega, of course, as well, but it's only doing a charm. Given that this is a ranged alluvial here with the Gazetep, you're drawing them closer to you. I think you're actually getting yourself into a position where you can be third-partying onto another fight. You charm two alluvials, and then they actually start attacking you. I think it could be a very similar scenario, actually, to Caradulox, where its Omega actually kind of works against it. So with that, Gazetep, because you're ranged, I think that I'll put you ahead of Caradulox, but you'd be surviving, you'd have shields and whatnot. However, offensively, you have absolutely nothing, and then your Omega is going to get you into trouble. So yeah, I think D is honestly a fair spot here for the Gazetep. Two more to go here. We've got the Relentless Ember Lynx, or the Relentless Lynxes as a whole, the Fighter Lynxes. This one I'm not going to take too much time with because it is basically going to fall into the same kind of category as the Exalted Monkier. I'm just going to put it behind it because of its strict single target nature. The only thing I'm double or second guessing myself is what do I value more? Being able to hit more alluvials behind the target like a Monkier, or have that innate healing and the Omega that the Relentless Lynx does have. But then I also have to consider that the Monkier also has Berserker, which is kind of where it finds its additional damage and sustain from as well. So I think I'll keep it like that. Last but not least, the Umber. It's tortured us throughout the entirety of the Illuvium Arena Pro League, or the IPL. I know as somebody who would go in and make clips or Illuvium over those tournament weekends, that I was getting bloody sick of seeing the runaway Umber every single match, it felt like. In a team scenario, 1v3, 1v4, 1v5, 1v6, I think we've seen as crazy as 1v8. The Umber was able to do in fantastic clutch scenarios. However, to give credit, you do have things like the drone augments where you get the tier 4 buff and get, I think it's attack damage and Omnivamp. Then you can add attack damage and Omnivamp on via alluvial augments, and you can really cater your entire team's build to hard focus the Umber and make it an unkillable monster. So how does that translate into risk to earn or into this Illuvium deathmatch? I don't think we're escaping it. I personally think that the Umber is going to be the best alluvial in the game, and there's a few reasons for it. It still has fantastic damage, just innate. No, it doesn't have any sort of crowd control at all, but what it does have is constant untargetability that comes out very, very fast with its Omega. And I gave the Chicondi a little bit of a shout out for this as well, because it does something similar, but it only attacks one target. Umber can attack, I think, 3. It's constantly dipping in and out of untargetability while chipping away at everything. it's never going to get focused to actually get stunned in the first place. It has to be essentially in a position where it catches strays. So I think, say, like a Phosphorus, for example. If it's attacking something beside Umber and it fires off its Omega and it does tag Umber a little bit, I feel like that's going to be the most consistent way that you can actually shut Umber down. So it's not that it's impossible, but I still think that actually trying to focus this thing is going to be next to impossible. God forbid you actually get reels and any of these boosts onto it. Especially as well, if you get the one where it gives you additional healing on takedown, Umber is going to be finding stray takedowns just for breakfast. It's going to find it no matter what. I imagine, depending on the range of its Omega, that there could be a separate fight like a couple meters away, and the Umber will still manage to steal a kill in that round. I do not see a world where Umber is not good, and if Steam Slayer stacks unlimited, he will one-shot things at the end. Yeah, 100% do agree. It is built to be a carry, but at the same time, it is such a safe alluvial that you're almost guaranteed to score a top 10 finish. I argue you're almost guaranteed to score top 3 in eliminations because you're just going to be catching strays in a good way. We've seen Umber dominance in the arena. I'm afraid that we're probably not going to see anything different come this risk to earn game mode, come Alluvium Deathmatch. Of course, nothing about this tier list or anything was meant to be talked about in financial advice-wise. I'm just strictly telling you based off of gameplay, because again, I don't give a shit about the value of your collection or your crypto bags. But in terms of gameplay, this is what I see. Can I do that right now? Add row above. There. That's a little bit better. This is how I truly see the game. But yeah, this is my tier list. Of course, way too early. We don't even know necessarily how Alluvium Deathmatch or the rest of game mode is actually going to work in terms of how the Alluvials behave in it. But thinking about it in the sense of like Alluvium Arena, and just taking those skills and putting them into a Battle Royale kind of style, this is my tier list. Of course, nothing about this is meant to be any sort of financial advice, but just based off of the information that I see right here, or seen in the arena, this is how I feel like the Alluvials will behave, and which ones you should probably look for. I would absolutely love to hear your take on the Alluvials, where I put them. Do you think that I'm wrong? Did I miss something that could potentially bump somebody up or bump somebody down? By all means, be sure to let me know in the chat or in the comments as well, and we'll gladly continue the conversation. Again, this is still extremely early. The announcement of the Alluvium Deathmatch is still extremely early, but it does look like it could be potentially a lot of fun. If you're new to the channel, come hang out with me a little bit more often. I do stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 a.m. my time, 3 p.m. UTC. So whether that's dropping a follow on Twitch or X or a subscription onto YouTube, I'm trying my damnedest here to keep up the entertainment side of things with gameplay, with Alluvium. Again, I have a little bit of a different mindset where I don't care about crypto in the slightest. I don't care about Web3. I just really enjoy the game, and I want to see it flourish, and I'm having a lot of fun still. As long as I'm still having fun, I'll still keep pushing as much as I possibly can. So I'd love to see you in chat. I'd love to have you hang out again sometime soon. But with that, that will be it for now. We'll see you in the next video.